Hi, it's Ryan. I just wanted to give a content warning at the start of this episode. This episode of Story Girl contains sensitive discussions about a stillbirth and the grieving process. I understand that this is a sensitive topic for many, and I just want to encourage anyone listening to this to please take care of yourselves. And if you don't want to hear it, that's fine. You can skip this episode. Or when you get to the 14.5 minute mark, fast forward about 2.5 minutes to the 17-minute mark, and you should be clear of the topic. Okay, thanks. Take care. Cavendish, PEI, 1911. Lucy Maud Montgomery returned home from an evening stroll along Lover's Lane.
It is the dearest spot in the world to me, and these walks give me such exquisite pleasure and furnish me with a little strength to go on with life and work.
She was greeted at the door by Daffy, a little gray cat that had become a close companion for both she and her grandmother. Daffy purred and rubbed against Maud's legs until she picked him up in her arms. She found her grandmother at the kitchen sink, cleaning the dishes from their 5 o'clock tea. Looking at her then, it struck Maud just how frail her grandmother had become.
Her hair was hanging in wisps about her face. This always makes an old person look older.
Maud had been in a dark mood of late. It had been several years since she had returned to Cavendish to be a companion for Grandma Lucy, and life with her was becoming increasingly difficult. Maud was now a best-selling author, making good money, and yet she felt,
I must live in subjection to a woman who is always inclined to be domineering and narrow-minded. Life with her means the utter suppression of all individuality in those who live with her.
Grandma Lucy finished up the dishes and took a seat in her favorite chair and rested her eyes. Maud took Daffy upstairs to her room to work on her writing. Later that night, she was woken. Grandma Lucy had developed a violent nagging cough. Maud made up a bed for her in the kitchen, where it was warmer, and poured her grandmother some tea. The following day, the doctor paid a house call and told Maud that Grandma Lucy had pneumonia.
When that was said, all was said. We knew at her age such an illness could have but one ending.
Within the week, Lucy Woolner McNeil would die at the age of 86, and Maud would have to play host to visiting mourners as her grandmother laid in state in the parlor of their home. It was the same room in which Maud remembers seeing her mother for the last time when she was just 2 years old. She was now 36, and so much history had passed between her and her grandmother. And as she looked at the older woman in those moments, all she could think was how death blots out all remembrances of any human imperfection.
I thought only of her much kindness, her faithfulness, her patience in earlier years, her love, yes, her love. She loved her own deeply and was very loyal to them.
Her Uncle Leander later lamented that Maud didn't know her grandmother before, quote, age and infirmity had stolen most of the brightness from her life, and she could not remember her as young, gay, happy, and lovable. From Knockabout Media, I'm Ryan Barnett, and this is Story Girl, the life of Lucy Maud Montgomery. In this episode, Maud's plate runneth over. Now a successful author, she must balance her writing career with her ever-mounting domestic responsibilities. This is Episode 3, Double Burden. Park Corner, 1911. In the weeks that followed Grandma Lucy's death, Maud would experience much more loss. A short time later, her beloved cousin Tilly also passed quite suddenly, and she had to say goodbye to Cavendish and the little room she called home for more than 30 years.
I've wept myself to sleep here, and many nights I've been happy here. Oh, little room, when I leave you, I fear my heart will break.
She had to watch as her Uncle John and Cousin Pierce took the house over. She could only stand by as they cut down the lady, her beloved birch tree. In fact, they had been felling trees all around the property. A lacerating act for Maud.
When I've lived with a tree for a long time, It seems to me like a beloved human companion.
With all her parental figures now gone, Maud was truly orphaned.
She was in her 30s. She was considered, at this point, an old maid by the standards of this time.
This again is Jessica Young.
And I think it always bothered her, or there was some voice in her head that wanted her to seem respectable in society, that wanted her appearance, that she wanted to keep up appearances.
Maud had actually been engaged, in secret, to Reverend Ewan MacDonald for some time.
I mean, I should not presume to know her thoughts. They are varied, but I think he, at the time, presented an opportunity when she was vulnerable, and he came at the right moment. He was an eligible bachelor who came to the community. He seemed to speak well when he did give his sermons, so in the beginning at least. So she wanted someone that she could admire and respect, but keep at a distance. That was, I think, her criteria for a husband at that time.
And one day in July, she traded the black garment she'd been wearing in mourning of her grandmother and her cousin for a white wedding dress. She would later write about her wedding in her journal.
I'd been feeling contented all the morning. I'd gone through the ceremony and the congratulations, unflustered and unregretful. And now, when it was all over, I found myself sitting there by my husband's side. My husband. I felt such a sudden horrible inrush of rebellion and despair. I sat at that gay bridal feast, in my white veil and orange blossoms, beside the man I had married, and I was as unhappy as I'd ever been in my life.
July 1912. Maud laid in bed, staring at the window curtains as they caught the early evening breeze. That afternoon, she had given birth to her first son, Chester Cameron MacDonald. She and Ewan had been married for a year now, and had been living in Leaksdale, Ontario. Maud was not enjoying her early days as a minister's wife. She found little stimulation in performing her duties.
Making sure or checking in on all of the parishioners, or so either calling on them or having them call on her at all hours of the day, being available to listen to them, essentially, and to make sure that her husband was well respected and looked good.
She counted no kindred spirits among her husband's flock, and found all the visiting required of her to be rather unpleasant. So when she learned that she was going to have a baby, she was over the moon.
I'm to be a mother,
she wrote in her journal.
It seems to me so incredible, so wonderful, so utterly impossible is happening to me.
Yet having a baby at that time, at the age of 37, came with many dangers for both child and mother. And Maud thought long about these possible perils. After all, she had been surrounded by death her whole life. However, as she would write in her journal,
this desire and the joy overpowers all the fears and anxieties that sometimes creep in to disturb me. The thought within me, I carry life, a soul, a human being who live and love and suffer and enjoy and suffer, is so amazing that I'm lost before the marvel of it.
In the months leading up to Chester's birth, she had envisioned the moment when she would hold her baby in her arms for the first time, and the love she'd feel for this.
Bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh.
Yet when her newborn boy was put on her chest in the first moments of his life, she felt nothing. She looked at him with curiosity and interest, in the way that she would look at a friend's child, but she felt nothing of the mother's love that she had been anticipating, the mother's love that she had been robbed of as a young child herself. She laid her head back down on her pillow, feeling a sickening shame take her over, and there it remained. She stared at the window all afternoon. There was nothing to really look at. It wasn't like her window in Cavendish. She had traded in her view of the island's green meadows, wooded hills, and apple orchards for a nondescript view of rural Ontario. She found little inspiration in her surroundings and her company. Then later, in a moment of quiet, with the trauma of delivery and the inconvenience of requisite visitations over, the nurse returned with little Chester.
Would you like to hold him again?
As she placed him on Maud's chest, the new mother looked at this fragile little creature that she had carried inside her for months, and saw him as though it were for the first time.
It seems to me that my whole being was engulfed in a wave of love for that little blinking mite of humanity that lay cuddled up to my breast. I understand now why it was so. The strain which I had passed had robbed me temporarily of almost all power of sensation, physical and emotions.
It wasn't as she anticipated, but that great moment came nonetheless. The moment in which she understood the profound state of motherhood.
Oh, my darling little son, you make up for everything I have suffered and missed in life. Everything led to you, and therefore I feel that all has been for the best.
She would later call 1912 her Annus Mirabilis, the wonderful year. More after this. It was May of 1913. Maud was finishing up work on The Golden Road, a follow-up to her 1911 novel, The Story Girl. She wasn't entirely happy with the book. She had been hurried in its writing.
I have had to write it at high pressure, all the time nervously expecting some interruption, which all too sure came 9 times out of 10.
The Page Company continuously applied pressure on Maud to put out work. Just a year earlier, they had published The Chronicles of Avonlea, a collection of short stories that Maud had revised and reworked from her earlier magazine work. She regarded this book as filler, something to please her publisher and maybe her fans, between her more substantial work as a novelist. At the same time, Chester was growing into what Maud would lovingly call an active, restless, ever-moving piece of mischief. And she brought in a young lady to help care for him, so that she could work uninterrupted. She also weaned the boy in that same month.
How I hated to do it. It seems to me that the dearest bond between us has been broken. He's a little less my own now.
In July, Maud, along with Chester and Ewan, would travel east to PEI. Her arrival stood in stark relief to when she had returned from Prince Albert all those years ago, when nobody, not even her grandfather, had met her at the train station. No, this time Maud returned a beloved daughter of the island, feted by the press and greeted warmly by friends and family. As they drove over the red island roads towards Bellevue, Maud caught a glimpse of the ocean for the first time in years.
Tears poured into my eyes. I trembled.
From the start, the trip reinvigorated Maud. She was far from her obligations to Elsie Page, far from the drudgery of her church work. She was again back with the natural world that breathed life into her soul. Then, one night in Cavendish, after Chester went to bed,
I slipped away out into the darkness of the summer evening and went to find the lost years.
She walked the familiar path back to her childhood home, now occupied by her cousin Pierce McNeil. Through the dim twilight, she crossed the familiar bridge over the brook and up the dark path under the spruces. She was swept away by the sway of memory, with no interruptions to clash with the dreams of the old days. She envisioned old friends, her grandmother, even little Daffy frisking across the grass. It was all as real as anything before her eyes. Then she approached the hill field of her old home. She was stopped in her tracks. She remembered the area had been home to a grove of spruce and maple trees. In truth, she counted the maples among her dearest companions. However, now,
only a desolation of stumps remained. That soulless Pierce McNeil had cut it down, made Jackal sit on his grandmother's grave.
She would later weep at the realization that she could never again return home. The Cavendish that she remembered, that she immortalized in her writing, was now gone in so many ways.
England has declared war on Germany. Good God, I cannot believe it.
It was August 1914. The world was at war, and a pregnant Maud wrote in her journal,
It must be a horrible dream. It has come up like a thundercloud.
Using her listening friend, she tried to make sense of the events that led to the conflict. She recalled that years earlier, the Governor-General Earl Grey, with whom she had a friendship, had warned her of an inevitable war between Britain and Germany, but she never thought it would come to pass. But it did, and Maud was horror-stricken. It was already a stressful time in her life. She and Ewan were readying to greet their second child any day now, but she felt unwell.
They're waiting for war news. It was a really hot summer, and it's just like everything just seems really oppressive.
And then the worst happened.
On August 13th, a darling little son was born to me. Dead.
Hugh Alexander MacDonald, Maud's second baby, died at birth. It was caused by a knot in its umbilical cord, she wrote, and Maud was taken by surprise. During this pregnancy, she had not been plagued by the same fears and anxieties she experienced while expecting Chester. Never once had she considered this a possible outcome.
I had had dreaded forebodings, but they had been for myself, not for my child.
And a familiar pattern in Maud's life soon followed.
They had taken my baby away and laid him in a little white casket in the parlor. I thought my heart would burst.
Amid the developing news of the war, Maud grieved little Hugh. On her feet for the first time in days, she began putting away the muslin-lined basket and little garments that she had put out in anticipation of his arrival. Going back through her journal, she found a passage in which she had written that she would be disappointed if her baby were not a girl. It was wicked to write such a thing, she thought. She had not felt this way. In the brief moment before learning of Hugh's death, she felt no disappointment. She would later write,
Oh, what a proud, happy mother I would have been with my 2 boys. Too proud, too happy. The gods were jealous.
As a leader in his community, Ewan would lead his own small war effort. Reports of German barbarism filled newspapers day after day, giving Canada's clergy a common evil against which to preach. Like many other ministers, Ewan encouraged the able-bodied men of his flock to enlist. War was the supreme self-sacrifice, dying so that others might live. During these early days of the Great War, Maud was consumed by her own grief and horrified by what she read in the papers. She thanked God that Chester was too young to go, but as soon as she said it, she shrank back in shame. In giving thanks, was she not also thanking him for sending some other woman's son in his place? At Christmas, Maud was visited by her cousin and close friend, Frederica Campbell. It was a visit that she had been looking forward to for months, because Freddie would bring so much levity and joy into the MacDonald home. Freddie was a true companion for Maud, in all the ways that Ewan couldn't or failed to be. She would talk to Maud about the war, something Ewan would not do. They would visit old friends, they'd laugh, and they'd share what Maud called real talk.
We did make the most of it,
She wrote of the visit.
and now it is over. I've emptied and rinsed my soul and taken fresh courage.
In that new year, 1915, Maud would resume her duties as a minister's wife, inviting newlyweds from the parish for tea and visiting with, quote, prosy old elders and their dames.
Those are painful duties which I perform as gracefully as may be. I can't talk eggs and butter with the female of the species, and that is almost all that most of them can talk.
Still, as Mrs. Ewan MacDonald, Maud took on added responsibilities. Women of the community organized their own Red Cross Society, of which Maud served as president. They would knit, sew, and pack supplies for Canadian soldiers. They would also make up donation boxes for Tag Day. The money they raised would support war work, such as buying wool for clothing or cotton for bandage rolls. Always the gifted orator, Maud would also speak at Red Cross gatherings and recite poetry at recruitment events. In the midst of all this, she also had another son, Ewan Stewart MacDonald, born October 7, 1915. They called him Stewart, and he took after Maud's side of the family, specifically her beloved father. She worked and gave of herself to the point of exhaustion. In her journal entries, we can see Maud juggling the various roles. She obsesses over the war.
It is becoming more and more evident daily that the Gallipoli campaign, from which we all hoped so much at one time, is a fiasco.
She worries for her new child.
Baby's doing fairly well, but does not gain as steadily as I would like. I dare say my constant mental disturbance is bad for him.
And she thinks about her career as a writer.
The other day I resumed work on a short story called The Schoolmaster's Bride. It is difficult to get the time for writing at all, but it must be managed. As matters are, I cannot afford to give it up, even for a time.
Well, she always wrote in the morning.
This is Kate MacDonald Butler, Maud's granddaughter and daughter of Stuart.
She would get up before anyone else in the household was up, and she wrote in the morning. I know that. She was amazing. Raising 2 children, a minister's wife, attending to the congregation. She also was a photographer. She had a garden. She collected recipes. She was so busy. If I accomplished half of what she did.
But as we know about Maud, writing was a form of transformation. This is Dr. Kate Scarth again.
I taught the Ellen Montgomery course at UPEI this spring, and we read Anne's House of Dreams.
Anne's House of Dreams is a novel born out of The Schoolmaster's Bride, that short story that Maud dusted off after Stuart's birth.
I got them to read excerpts from Montgomery's journals from the time she was writing Anne's House of Dreams. And I think that, that reveals so much about her experience with the war, because Anne's House of Dreams, there's darkness in it, but it's so colorful, just like infused with color, with PEI beauty, with friendship, all of those things that we associate with Montgomery. And then you read her journals, and it's talking about the war and how difficult things were. And you get a sense of how that novel provided a kind of escape back to PEI, but back to a PEI before the war.
Through her writing, Maud could always revisit her beloved Prince Edward Island as it once was.
But then, of course, also the darkness shows up in that novel.
In the book, Anne too suffers the loss of a baby. Her first daughter, Joyce, dies shortly after birth.
You just get the powerful and the poignantness and the deeply felt experience of that loss in the novel. So although Anne's House of Dreams isn't set during World War I, it helps her, I think, she's navigating her own grief.
But Anne's House of Dreams would soon become much more than a cathartic act of writing for Maud. It would be front and center in a growing conflict between she and her Boston-based publisher, L.C. Page. On the next episode of Story Girl, the life of Lucy Maud Montgomery.
Yeah, he published stories that he didn't have permission to publish. And she went after him. And wow, can you imagine a woman in that day and age going after a big American publisher like that?
Story Girl is an original production of Knockabout Media, written and hosted by me, Ryan Barnett. The series producers are Ryan Barnett and Sonia Jamidi, and our associate producers are Maya Foster-Sanchez and Christy Profit. This podcast was made possible thanks to funding from the Government of Canada. This series was recorded by Tyler Rauman at the Community Digital Arts Hub and features interviews with Kate MacDonald Butler, Kate Scarth, Jessica Young, Laura Robinson, and Yuko Matsumoto. Additional voices were provided by Candice Amarante and Matthew Barnett. A special thanks to the heirs of Ellen Montgomery and the Ellen Montgomery Institute for their help with putting this podcast together. If you're an educator and want to incorporate this podcast into your classroom, we have a listening guide that can be found in the show notes or downloaded from our website at knockaboutmedia.com. There, you will also find more of our podcast series, including Among Equals, The Story of a National Crime, and Once Upon a Time in Hollywood North. Thanks for listening.
A Knockabout Media original. Hold on.